Back here on the show, back on the Chip Shot Football Podcast to not review anything, but kind of touch back on an issue that we addressed a little bit in yesterday's segment, talking about the Bucks and the Eagles game. Now this whole issue, if you guys saw the clip where Jalen Hurts was asked a question about the conversation him and Nick Sirianni could potentially have about this team's identity and how they address it heading into a bye and how basically they try to improve this situation. And Jalen Hurts was asked about it, and all he said was, we have our moments. 4 words. We got 4 words out of Jalen Hurts in regards to a question asked about Nick Sirianni and just their relationship and how basically it is moving forward with this question about this team's identity, because a lot of people have some questions, a lot of questions from this Eagles team, not only from this game. Still being at 2-2 isn't the end of the world, but it stretches back to last year, right? That's always the biggest thing with this Eagles team, with the collapse that they had last year. I mentioned how symbolic almost this game was for the Eagles because it all culminated last year, that big collapse with the game against Tampa Bay, right? Where everything that was wrong with this team sort of got exposed, right? The players weren't good enough. You saw Tampa Bay's offense have their way with them. The offense for the Eagles also wasn't able to put anything together, and it just became a rout towards the end of last year in the wild card round of the playoffs. So now the Eagles kind of have a symbolic redo of that whole opportunity to face the Tampa Bay Bucks again in Florida again, a playoff rematch. So it was a chance to have this sort of redo, right? To kind of put everything that you grabbed in this offseason, right? The addition of Saquon, the 2 new coordinators, the pieces on defense, to put all that together and show that if you had all these guys and how much you've improved just in 4 games, to bring them up against the team that really embarrassed you last year, it was a good test to see where they were at. And we had the exact same result happen as we did back in January or whenever the game took place. And it really just shows, it epitomizes the quote of, the more things change, the more they stay the same, apparently, for the Philadelphia Eagles, because for as much as they changed, and they changed a lot, they brought in Kellen Moore and Vic Fangio, obviously, very different personnel and scheme and game planning for both of these guys. Nick Sirianni not calling the plays anymore. That was a big change. You basically still had the same offensive line. You had Cam Jurgens now at center. Mekhi Becton coming in, also playing right guard. Obviously, Saquon coming in. Devin White, Bryce Huff. They drafted Quinyon Mitchell, who's a starter now. C.J. Gardner-Johnson's coming back. All these guys, a lot of new pieces coming in for the Eagles, and still we saw the same defensive mistakes that we saw last year in that game against the Bucks. A lack of communication, poor discipline, bad tackling, weird game planning this time. Whereas last year, the players that the Eagles had out there on defense, if we're being honest, probably should not have been out there in a playoff game for the Eagles. And now this year, they got good players. Zach Bond's a great player. Jordan Davis, obviously. Jalen Carter. I like Quinyon Mitchell. I think he's going to be a good player. But I think this year it's more so of a questionable game plan, schematics-wise, decision-making from Vic Fangio and how he approached this game. We mentioned and talked about it yesterday, how it was confusing why they were reluctant to bring more than 4 guys rushing the passer. Baker Mayfield was way too comfortable, and there has been some questionable decisions from that defensive side of the ball that compared to last year, the personnel was clearly the problem, and maybe this year it's the same thing, right? I mentioned the scheme, but still personnel-wise, they brought in Bryce Huff, and he really hasn't contributed anything, I don't think. I haven't mentioned Josh Sweat's name at all this year, I don't think, and it's just always so centered around Jordan Davis and Jalen Carter. Also, you have these personnel pieces. I don't know why Devin White doesn't play that much. I don't know if there's something there, but I think he could really help them out. If you want to talk about tackling and poor discipline on that end, the guy that's the complete opposite of that is Devin White. I've been kind of holding that back in the back of my head for this time now, but that's another decision that's questionable right on that side of the ball. We saw the same defensive mistakes last year. The offensive inefficiency is also a problem again. the game planning, I don't know what the process is looking like there, but the idea of throwing so much this year when you have Saquon Barkley back there is dumbfounding to me. I know you didn't have AJ Brown or Schmitty in this game, obviously, or Lane Johnson didn't play, but still, you made it a game last week against the Saints, and I think people looking at the Saints and the Bucks could probably say they're about equal. So what you did so good in the Saints game, we didn't see again this time around with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, which was disappointing. And one of the biggest things is that Jalen Hurts still looks like he's completely lost out there. He hasn't bounced back from the performances last year. He's nowhere near the 2022 version that made it to the Super Bowl. And I don't think he's gotten worse or anything like that, but the last thing you also don't want to happen is that he sort of plateaus, and we've already seen the best of Jalen Hurts already, which isn't ideal by any means because of the contract and how much the offense is centered around him, the tush push and everything like that. You don't want to see that also, so that only just adds on. We're seeing, like I said before, a lack of discipline, a lack of a clear plan on game days when something doesn't go right. I'll get into that a little bit more later. The personnel pieces, the new ones, aren't really contributing outside of Saquon Barkley, and the off the field issues with Jalen Hurts and Nick Sirianni, like I mentioned at the start, with that quote from Jalen Hurts, seem to kind of just be bubbling up again from last year with those reports saying that there was a clear disconnect from Jalen and Sirianni based on how Sirianni was calling the offense and whatnot. So Nick Sirianni takes a step back, Kellen Moore comes in, and still it seems like there's something there. I don't want to say it's personal or anything like that. I obviously have no idea about that, but it feels like Jalen is frustrated. Obviously, coming off of the loss and the rough start, that's frustrating, but it feels like there's something bothering him when Sirianni gets brought up any way, shape, or form. It always comes up as a cold response or anything like that. I don't think I might be reading too much into it, but when they mention something about Sirianni, it's always very serious. And I know Jalen is a very, I guess, stoic kind of personality when he's talking to the media. But I feel like when you ask him about, I don't know, like Jason Kelsey or AJ Brown, he might crack a smile here or there. But with Sirianni, it always feels like it's very intentional and serious also. And it just kind of smells of a lack of belief. I don't think he's completely lost the locker room or anything like that, but it's not a good message because you say that heading into a bye, now you have all this time to kind of marinate in it, to kind of send that message and leave it kind of just sitting there with the team obviously seeing that and how they kind of interpret it towards their feelings of Nick Sirianni. It brings up the question about, can this team really move forward with Sirianni if the leader of this team, Jalen Hurts, isn't really believing in him? And you still see all the issues from last year really just not improving. And some of the things I've really, kind of picked up on that really have kind of bothered me, and I'm not like an Eagles fan or anything like that, but the things that I kind of attach to Sirianni a little bit, I'll explain, but some of them include the slow starts. Looking back on this game, the Eagles hadn't scored in the first quarter yet at all this year, adding to the slow starts. There was no first down for the Eagles against the Bucks last week until late in the second quarter, which obviously is awful. They couldn't handle the blitz against the same team that beat them last year doing the exact same thing. So if you have the head coach, the quarterback still there, obviously you have a new offensive coordinator. If you're facing the same team, same head coach, same identity and whatnot, and you still can't handle the blitz, I'm looking at the head coach, right? The idea with all of this is the lack of preparation that I think is a big problem with this Eagles team, and I think it just falls on Sirianni, obviously. That's another thing. And the lack of preparation, the lack of being able to adjust, call audibles, or just look somewhere else for a solution is something that I just don't see Nick Sirianni having the answers to, right? Like, without their stars, AJ Brown, Devontae Smith, when everybody's not playing together, it feels like they don't know what to do. They have no game plan, no plan B when those guys go out. They over-rely on those guys, and I think that's the narrative built around Jalen Hurts a little bit. I like Jalen Hurts as a quarterback. I think he's very good. I don't think you could just go from playing in the Super Bowl and being the best player on that field to now everyone's thinking you just rely on all your weapons, right? I think there's more to it than that. And the lack of not having a game plan to kind of go to if these guys aren't on their day makes it seem like it all kind of falls on Jalen, almost like a Brock Purdy situation, right? But in no way am I saying that Jalen Hurts is absolved from any blame. He definitely does need to play better as well, but the two biggest factors are Jalen and Nick Sirianni. And if we're talking about a drastic decision to take, they're not going to move on from Jalen Hurts right now because of the contract they just gave him. And you don't really find a quarterback like Jalen with the athletic attributes that he has as well. So you're naturally just going to look at Nick Sirianni. And also, the idea with this Eagles team, they just look like, to me, whenever I see them play, it looks like they're just a boat or a ship out at sea, just kind of drifting without really having a captain or any sort of navigation to guide them anywhere, right? It just feels like they're just coasting, kind of just going with however the game pans out, and they have really no control over anything. With these inconsistent performances we've seen, the 2-2 record, and you look at some of these games as well and how they've turned out. They're 2-2 right now, but they could have lost to Green Bay if the Packers converted in the red zone, at least one of those chances. Lackluster offense again against the Saints, but thankfully for them, they won that game. Could you imagine if they didn't have Saquon in these games or at all this season? They could have been maybe winless right now, honestly, if without the 3 touchdowns in the first game. They lost to the Falcons. They just lost to the Bucks pretty convincingly. You lost to the Falcons, like I said, the Bucks. You could have lost probably to the Packers, and I'm missing a team in there as well. It's just not coming to me, but it's an over-reliance on these stars, and I just don't think that there's a real game plan there to kind of help you out when these stars aren't having their best day, or you're just not using them, which is a whole other issue as well. And people keep bringing up Shane Steichen, and this is one of the last things I'll say on this whole situation regarding Nick Sirianni. People keep bringing up Shane Steichen and as a reason for the decline of Jalen Hurts and this offense, and losing Jonathan Gannon for the defense as well. So if you're a good head coach, right? Good head coaches like Andy Reid, Mike Tomlin, Matt LaFleur, Sean McVay, guys like that, they'll lose coordinators, but you hardly ever see them just take a nosedive right after that, right? If you lose Shane Steichen, if you lose Jonathan Gannon, and you still keep the majority of your entire roster, and Nick Sirianni, kind of takes a step back off of play calling duties, and this team is still having questionable decisions, and they just look lost from a leadership standpoint, people naturally look at the head coach and think, well, if you're not calling plays, and without these 2 coordinators, you're incapable of making this team look like it did when both of these guys were here. What are you really adding to this team, right? What is your attribute that is keeping you here, forcing us, to keep you here, right? What are you adding to this if you're not adding the leadership aspect of it, if you're not adding game planning or play calling like some of these other guys are on either side of the ball, and you lose your coordinators, and now everything kind of crumbles around you on both sides of the ball? It kind of makes you think, like, what is Nick Sirianni's addition to the Eagles now? And that's why I believe that with so many things already having changed around Nick Sirianni, and they're not going to move on from Jalen Hurts, obviously, to kind of go to Kenny Pickett, right? They're not going to do that. It's starting to appear like Sirianni seems like the most evident answer to this idea that if things don't get fixed, you're going to almost have to go to changing Sirianni. The hot seat is very much there for him. And I think if we don't see a change, especially coming out after the bye, I don't know if they're going to change it right away, just coming off of the bye and just like fire him, or after a few weeks, fire him during the season. But it's definitely the most delicate situation with a head coach. And for all the reasons that I mentioned as well, it's just some things that I've picked out. It can't really happen when a team's this talented. It makes no sense for them to be 2-2 and be a questionable 2-2 at that, unconvincingly in a lot of these games. So is he the answer? Can they move forward with Sirianni? I don't believe so. I feel like we're going to have to see a change there to really get a real answer to see what the problem is. If you move on from Sirianni, obviously down the road maybe, and you still struggle, then we could start talking about Jalen. But I don't think it has to go in the reverse order. Sirianni's definitely the one you look at right now for a lot of these issues, because a lot of them, I think, just kind of permeate down from the lack of leadership and any sort of additions that he might bring to this Eagles team. But not the end of the world, but 2-2, still wanting more from this Eagles team is the biggest problem. So that is one situation between a quarterback and a coach, some problems there. We're going to move on to another one between Aaron Rodgers and this time Robert Saleh. Issues over the cadence call from Aaron Rodgers kind of point to the bigger problems that the Jets have had in recent years, and it's something that they need to stop in order to have Aaron Rodgers fully help them this year and if they want to reach their goals. We're going to get more into that when we return in just a couple seconds. Don't go anywhere.
Look